Influencers are currently spreading fear around things like white bread or kids cereals because they've now got this label as ultra processed food. But this movement has therefore created a movement towards more whole food. And on the surface, and the vast majority of the time, this is a really good thing. However, for you as a runner, having more whole food and therefore more fiber coming in from all the plants that you're eating could be the main thing that's causing you to need a mid-run bush break, if you know what I mean. So to be able to fuel up with enough carbohydrate before your runs, but avoid that emergency break mid-run, you need to understand fiber. And that's what we're going to be covering in this video. I'm James Hudson and I'm a registered sport nutritionist, and I like to make unbiased, unsponsored, evidence-informed videos to help runners like you understand their nutrition so you can run confident knowing that you've got the energy, but also you've got the confidence that you're not going to need that emergency toilet break. Today, we're unpacking the truth about fiber, when it might actually be advantageous to have some lower fiber foods, but understanding when and understanding how to do that in the context of your training and your lifestyle. And if you stay with me to the end of this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my 48-hour carb load plan where fiber really comes into it. We're going to understand how to make sure you're getting enough carbohydrate, but also you're minimizing your gut residue from having too much fiber in your diet. So we're going to look at the different foods there that you have complete confidence, you know what you're doing, and you're going to be able to smash your race, whatever the distance. So let's kick things off by explaining why fiber is just so good and why the vast majority of the time I do want you eating high fiber foods. So we've got things like heart health, blood control, gut health. And if you've ever watched that Netflix documentary Game Changers, although some of the science is maybe portrayed in a slightly misleading way, a lot of the benefits that the people who go through the vegan diet are getting is probably less from reducing meat intake, but more from increasing fiber intake. So increasing fiber intake is having a huge amount of positive outcomes on general health markers. Definitely, we do want you eating high fiber foods the vast majority of the time. The thing is, diet culture and influencers have really grabbed hold of this and maybe taken it to a bit of an extreme. Now, for the general population, that extreme could be helpful in just making sure they eat a bit more real food. But if you're watching this, you're probably a runner. Now, if you've taken it to the extreme, if you're someone who eats a very, very healthy diet, you very rarely have ultra processed foods or sugar, then the chances are you are eating a lot of fiber at the moment. And that is probably the main reason why you're having those unwanted toilet breaks mid-run. However, it's worth noting here that you are not the general population. If you're a runner, you're doing far more exercise than the vast majority. So the advice of eating loads more fiber and never touching any low fiber foods probably doesn't necessarily apply. Because let's take your average Joe. If they're eating more fiber, they're then sedentary the vast majority of the time. They've got lots of blood flow going to their gut. That means they've got lots of blood flow to help with the digestion. If you're a runner and you have lots of high fiber foods, then you try and go for a run, well, the blood that would be in your gut when you start running goes to your muscles to be able to provide the energy for you to actually run. That means there's less blood flow to help with the digestion. If you've got lots of food going through your digestive tract and you don't have the blood to help with that digestion, combine that with the bouncing nature of running, you've got a recipe for disaster. So what we need to do is two things. We need to, one, start training your gut to be able to tolerate more undigested food in it during your runs. And then also we need to have a strategy ahead of long runs and on race day that you can rinse and repeat. That means you need a carbohydrate loading strategy that is going to minimize your risk of having these tummy troubles. And that is where we look to reduce fiber in those specific parts of your calendar, really. So the truth is, context matters. Fiber is good, yes, don't get me wrong, but timing is also very important, especially for runners. So when talking about timing, the first thing we need to understand is what's called the speed of your gut. So as an example here, how do we calculate the speed of your gut? Let's say I was to eat a corn on the cob at a barbecue. Delicious. And I then set a timer on my watch. You would then stop that timer when you next see that some of that corn on the cob again, probably when I sit down on the toilet, either the next day or the day after. That is going to be how long it takes the food that you've eaten to go all the way through your 9-meter long digestive tract and come out the other end. Why does corn on the cob work really neatly for this? Because it means it's going to pass all the way through. So if you swallow a piece of corn whole, as you probably know, you will see that thing again. So that's going to give you an idea of the speed. If you have a gut speed that's under 24 hours, it's probably quite a fast gut. It's more likely to be in the sort of 20 to 36 hour mark. So this number is going to be based very much on how much fiber you have habitually coming into your diet. If you eat a fairly plant-based diet and you have lots of fiber, it's more likely to be quite short because there's lots of things pushing through your gut, so it'll be quite quick. If you eat a more Western style diet, typically lower in fiber, you don't have many whole grains, you don't have many vegetables, don't have many of those high fiber plant foods, and you do eat eat maybe more ultra processed foods than you would like to, then it could be up to 48 hours or even further. Now, what does this piece of information actually give us? Well, it tells you how long you may need to reduce your intake of high fiber foods before your long run or race. The long run or race that I want you to target is the ones where you would normally get the issues. So I don't want you to suddenly drop low fiber before every single run, because what that might mean is that you're only eating low fiber foods if you run 2, 3, 4 times a week, and suddenly we're only eating ultra processed low fiber foods. That's not good. We want to make sure we target probably the long run, because that's probably the one where there's long enough time for you to actually experience the issues. Now, even if you're someone who doesn't always experience tummy trouble on a run, but it's happened a few times, I would recommend that you practice a low fiber strategy, so the carb load that I'm going to be sharing later in this video, and do it before your actual race. Why is that? Because before your actual race, in the moments before and the day before, you're probably going to be a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious. All of that stress comes into your gut. So that actually increases your likelihood of having these unwanted tummy troubles. So if you're someone who in training, you've been absolutely fine, no tummy trouble, gets the race day and you suddenly suffer, then what we need to do is practice a low fiber, high carb load in training so that you know you perform well on it, and then rinse and repeat on race day. That's going to bring you confidence knowing that you've done your carb load and you're not going to have any of these unwanted issues. So let me dive into fiber in a little bit more detail. So fiber is literally the structural component in plants. So just like how humans have skeletons that keeps us upright, plants have fiber. So I always have the visual here of celery. Celery is really strong, keeps it upright. So therefore there's lots of insoluble fiber in there to keep it up. Insoluble fiber is insoluble in water. So that means it's not gonna have water absorb into it and it goes into a liquid. So it really forms the bulk of stool and it keeps things pushing through that 9-meter long digestive tract. We want to have lots of that. Now, that's normally things like the skin of an apple, for example, or the skin of all fruit and veg for that matter. But then you've also got soluble fiber. Now that's fiber that water can be drawn into. So that's like the inside bits of fruit and of plant foods. What that does is it draws water into your gut. So if you're particularly constipated, having more soluble fiber is going to be really helpful because it's going to draw water in and make the bowel movement easier to pass. So when you eat more total whole food, you're probably getting a big mix of both. I wouldn't overthink soluble versus insoluble because really whole food contains a big mixture of it. But I just wanted to explain that. In terms of fiber, why it is indigestible, that comes down to the bonds that make it up, because it's not carbs or fiber. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate. However, the bonds that link the molecules within the fiber, our body doesn't have the enzyme to actually break it down. So they stay intact, which is why we don't process much in the way of calories from fiber. And the first time I used a low fiber strategy with a client was right back when I first started out as a nutritionist, and I was working with a goalkeeper, and he always was just feeling a bit nervous with food and would always struggle with a funny tummy during his matches. He always got quite nervous because he was a professional footballer, so needed to perform well. So what we did was in the 24 hours, we restricted some of the high fiber, healthy foods that he thought he should be having. What this allowed him to do was get out onto the pitch, and not only did he not have the tummy trouble he normally experienced, he also felt a bit lighter on his feet. Now, if you think about this, if in terms of running, if you're going to be going out doing a half marathon or marathon, feeling a bit lighter on your feet could be really helpful, even if it's just psychologically. I mean, the reality is you can take out some gut weight, so it might be a case of you being 100 grams lighter. I mean, great, that's a bit of a win, but actually more for just how you feel. That's then going to cross over into performance. So the truth is, white bread, white rice aren't always the enemy, and actually as a runner, you could even use them to your advantage to help your performance on the day. Now, I want to always give context to this and get you feeling confident with your food choices. So I'm going to be jumping on a video to explain a table that looks at how much carbohydrate there are per foods per 100 grams, as well as how much fiber they're bringing, so that you can start making smart choices before your long runs, so that you're running without needing to go to the toilet. Before I do that though, I want to quickly share with you my Performance Accelerator program, because I have a few spaces left. Now, if you're someone who has tried to make changes to their nutrition before, have struggled, it might be that you know your nutrition is a missing link in your performance and that you're struggling with energy because you're trying to train more. You've started training and feeling better, probably losing some weight, and now it's got to a point where you're a bit stuck. You want to train more, but you don't have the energy. If that's the case, you don't need a nutritionist, you need a sport nutritionist, and actually actually some guidance might be really, really helpful in allowing you to start on a new trajectory where time is going to be on your side. So if you want time to be on your side and have the nutritional habits to support that, then consider clicking the link. I'll put a link to my calendar. We can have a free chat and find out if sport nutrition coaching could be right for you. Okay, so I've just jumped into a slide from a presentation I did called Nail Your Carb Load with Confidence. And this slide here is talking about gut residue. So gut residue is the amount of undigested food that's going to be in your gut when you're running. Now, that is coming purely from the amount of fiber in the food that you're going to be having. That's still in that transit time getting towards the lower end of your gut. If we've got lots of gut residue, it's going to be increasing the risk that you're going to have those lower body GI issues, read, bush, trips. So what do we want to do? Well, firstly, we want to try and make sure we're eating high carbohydrate. So let's talk about this from a carb load perspective. You might be looking to try and have roughly 8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Other sport nutritionists might recommend 9 or even 10 grams per kilogram body weight. It's going to depend a little bit on athlete size, leanness, experience having that much carbohydrate. So if you're used to having 4 or even 5 grams per kilogram body weight and just getting up to 6 or 7 feels like a lot of food, then I recommend just doing that, because having a small bump is still going to be helpful. The reason I'm mentioning all those numbers is really to give context to this column, because let's say you are 60 kilograms and you're trying to get roughly 8 grams per kilogram body weight in your carb load. That's going to be 6 times 8, 48, so 480 grams of carbohydrate over the day. So if you're trying to get that all from potatoes, you're just doing your carb load on potatoes, you're going to need to eat an awful lot of potatoes. So having some carbs coming in from sources that are lower in fiber will make it easier. But what this table really does is it shows how much fiber there are compared to the amount of carbohydrate that you're having. So if you are normally having oats for breakfast, for example, yes, a very healthy breakfast, don't get me wrong, I have it the vast majority of my throughout my week, but I tend not to have it the day before I want to go and do a marathon, because it's adding a lot of carbohydrate. So if I'm looking to have roughly 100 grams of carbohydrate at my breakfast, I'm going to be having a big old bowl of oats, but I'm going to be getting a lot of fiber if I did that. If I contrast that with having some Rice Krispies, it's suddenly going to be very, very easy to get the similar amount of carbohydrate, but with much less carbohydrate. So similar amount of carbohydrate with much less fiber. Because let's take white rice. If we compare these two, 75 grams of carbohydrate per 100 grams, but almost or under 2 grams of fiber. So it's a fantastic way of getting carbs in without that fibrous element. Things like quinoa, for example, if you were trying to do a carb load by adding lots of quinoa, then to get 100 grams of quinoa, you'd be having, because we need to double this, you'd be having roughly 14 grams of fiber. Similarly with oats, similarly with if you're trying to get all your carbs in from lentils, you're going to be having 15 to 16 grams of fiber. Around training, great. General day-to-day lifestyle, great. We want these numbers to be very high, but what we're trying to do race day -1 is bring fiber way down. So if we're having our white rice, if we're having a rice pudding, for example, made with white rice, but we can also put a little bit of jam in it, because there's no fiber at all really in jam, it's going to give you that little bit extra. So having some more ultra processed foods to help with this carb load is going to be absolutely fine. Think about it in the context of your day to day. Because you don't normally have white rice, because you don't normally have loads of jam or sports drinks coming in when you're not training, then actually it's a very small part of your total diet. Therefore, in terms of context, it's not really affecting your diet quality too negatively. If the vast majority of the time you're eating lots of wholesome, healthy foods and lots of fiber, great. But then before this particular like race day -1 or every other week, for example, you're doing a long run and you don't want to be having any issues, then the day before that's going to be 1 out of your 7 days a week where you're having slightly less fibrous foods. Make sure you then incorporate a lot of the healthier foods afterwards. So as you can see from that table, swapping your brown bread to white bread the day before, or swapping your oats to a Rice Krispies or even a Cocoa Pops, because you're not doing it that frequently, it's not going to have lasting impact on your overall health, but it is going to mean you're topping up your muscle glycogen stores without adding lots of gut residue. The carb load plans that I tend to build for clients have between 10 to 15 grams of fiber coming in over the whole day, and that's still with clients getting 8 grams per kilogram body weight total carbohydrate. carbohydrate. Now, day to day, the recommended daily allowance of fiber should be around 25 to 30 or even 35, depending on athlete size. But actually, having more than that is probably still really beneficial. Like, there's no real upper limit to how much fiber you should be having, and more is probably better. So trying to push right the way up to 60 is probably going to be a good thing. Now, if your gut is more used to handling more fiber, then actually, when you're running in training and you're eating fiber around it, it's going to be more used to tolerating that undigested food or that gut residue during your run. So I don't want you to back off fiber all the time. I want your gut to get used to having fiber in it at increasing intensities. Even if you're not experiencing GI issues, still drop down before your actual race. Practice this low fiber strategy so that when anxiety and nerves are there, you still know that you're not going to have that unwanted toilet trip. 48 hours prior, and this is the big takeaway from all of this, prior to your main event, you want to be looking to reduce down fiber. You might have learned that the speed of your gut is around 30 hours. Therefore, probably the evening meal before on race day -2, we're going to look to take out a lot of the high fiber elements. So basically reducing the vegetable part or swapping from the whole grains to a more refined grain. Then race day -1, instead of having your whole granary bread or your oats dish, we're going to have that kids cereal. We're going to have some fruit. We're going to have some jam on white bread as well. Then instead of having a big salad, lots of veg, brown rice, quinoa for your topping up your carbs at lunch, you're going to have something really plain like white rice. Again, double thumbs up for white rice, getting carbs in without fiber. I haven't really spoken much about protein and fat here, but a little aside, let's bring down fat to make it easier to get more carbs in so that you're not feeling overly full. Keep protein fairly moderate so that if we're having a white rice dish, I would normally have something super easy like a tin of tuna with it so that there is some protein in there as well, but it's still fairly low fat. Rinse and repeat your lunch dish with dinner so that if you're going to a race, you're on the go, you've still got something that you've tested before, it works well, and it's ticking all of these boxes, topping up your carb element, but keeping fiber really low. Now, I always get asked, what should I eat before my race, James? Where does fiber sit within this? Now, there's two schools of thought. So either you can stick with the very low fiber option. So you could go with Rice Krispies, honey, for example, like a couple of hours before. You might run well on that. Personally, I feel good. I feel like I'm quite light on it, very light on my feet. However, you could also have a higher fiber dish. Why? That goes against everything you've just said, James. Well, because you've only got 2.5, 3 hours before your actual race, that high fiber dish that you're eating isn't going to reach the lower portion of your digestive tract. So if you know you've done all your long runs and you normally have oats and you know you run well on oats, then have your oats. It's going to have cleared the stomach after 2.5, 3 hours. So it's going to be in the upper part of the digestive tract. So you should still be able to run on that without having the unwanted lower body. This is something that you should experiment with in training, whether you want to have something smaller, lighter, not necessarily smaller, but still high carb, but lighter because it's lower fiber and lower fat, aka the Rice Krispies, or have something higher fiber. Whether you choose high fiber or low fiber the day of the race might also come down to your body's response to carbohydrate. If you're someone who has sugar or has low fiber foods, feels a bit wired, like you go up and down quite quickly, then I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend having the high fiber option. But if you're someone who you can have some white bread, for example, and it doesn't jack you up and you feel fine, then I would probably go for that because it just means you're going to be ever so slightly lighter on race day, and that could translate into performance. Now, a real fundamental of this is to practice this strategy ahead of time, because I have had some clients who we've practiced this strategy with and they didn't feel good having done a low fiber carb load because they're someone who is very responsive to carbohydrate. Therefore, when it got to race day, they maybe couldn't poo beforehand, and actually that made them feel anxious and it made them feel a bit constipated. So there's obviously context within this. Try it, see how you feel. There's going to be so many inter-individual differences that we can't account for with generic advice of going low fiber prior to the race. It might work for the masses, but I have experienced some clients not going well with it. So do practice it and don't just do it the day before your actual race. So the truth is, fiber is not bad. It's all about context. Having some low fiber foods and using them specifically ahead of long runs or race day could be a really helpful strategy for enabling performance and getting you feeling confident. If you found this video helpful, remember, hit like, subscribe, and consider sharing it with a friend who is a bit scared of white bread but is always struggling in the bushes on your long trail runs. And drop me a comment below if you'd like me to break down my full carb load strategy in a separate video. I'll see you in the next one.